Hello and welcome to episode 19 of the Ego Chall Podcast, a Call of Duty esports podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I am joined by Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we will be breaking down the first LAN event of the season, the first LAN event in over 15 months, the Stage 4 Major, a $500,000 event, which was eventually won by, not a real big surprise for us, but Atlanta FaZe. They win their third major of the year with a close contest by against the Dallas Empire. We're also going to talk about the Los Angeles Thieves trying to get a new roster in there, and Hook just misspelling his name and causing a lot of controversy. And we'll talk about some roster mania news involving the Los Angeles Guerrillas, unfortunately. How you doing, Bink?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm alright. It's not as hot today, so it's not that bad to be in this room.
That's
Usually it's about
that's good.
95 degrees with no fan, and I'm sweating bullets like in the opening, which I am starting to sweat, but it's not as bad. So let's get back into Call of Duty. We have a week off coming this week, but we had a really, really big event because obviously, like I said, we hadn't had a LAN since March 2020, which was the Los Angeles home series, which the Dallas Empire won back when there were five-man teams and online wasn't even a thing in the Call of Duty League, at least in the professional scene. So we start off in the losers bracket. I noted that we picked really similarly in our preview show. We picked like almost the exact same winners, and at least through the first 2 days, we got like 85% of those matches wrong. The Seattle Surge were actually one of the only teams that I know you said you picked them, but I think I might have picked them too. I'm not actually sure. But the Seattle Surge, they win an actual match against the London Royal Ravens 3-1 to get out of losers round one. I think this was only the second time this year that they had won a match at the major. It was only their fifth or sixth win of the entire season. What'd you think of Seattle's win here?
Yeah, you can pull up the bracket if you want on our other screen, so viewers
Yeah, I
have
did.
it. But um, yeah, I was on the fence for this match in our preview show. I think I ended up going with Seattle, but I said I could have saw London taking it just because like both teams are bottom of the pack, and weren't really sure what we are going to get from either of them. But Seattle comes out, and Octane in particular looked really good on LAN. The only map they dropped was the Search. They won both hard points. They started on Apocalypse, which was one. It's despite London's changes throughout the year, it's been a map that each iteration of London has played a lot since it was added. And Seattle takes that one 250-142, and they also won another control. I think that gave them like a 3 control win streak or something at this point. And then they won Check Me Hardpoint 250-89, putting London in the 100-point club to eliminate them from the tourney. So it was a good performance out of Seattle, and obviously it was a sign of more things to come from them at this tournament. But just from this initial series, I was pretty impressed with how Seattle actually looked on LAN, and Octane in particular, he was lighting it up.
Yeah, just really surprising. I think Mike, every time that the Surge won a control or they won a match, Mike was adding me in our group chat because I've obviously been really outspoken about Seattle this entire season, about how bad they've been, especially in control. So it was actually pretty cool to see them do well this weekend. In the other losers bracket round one match, we had the Battle of Los Angeles, the Thieves versus the Guerrillas. But we actually had a last minute roster change for the Thieves because Hook was unavailable due to a missed COVID test, and we eventually found out that he misspelled his name in the like when he had to register to get his name on like the COVID-19 testing list, which ended up biting him in the butt. He wasn't able or something like the exact details are like a little tricky for me. So he was not available to test when he was supposed to, and then when they wanted to test him before the match on this would have been Thursday, I don't think that they would have gotten the results back in time before the match would have began. So they ended up having to the Thieves, ended up having to use Draza instead of Hook in their match against the Guerrillas. Things didn't go as planned, as you could expect from not having your starting lineup in the match. And this starting lineup doesn't have a lot of experience to begin with, the Hook one. So they lose 3-2 to the Guerrillas, which is pretty big for the Guerrillas because I picked against them. This was the first time in I don't know, 3 months or something like that I picked against them in a major, and they come out and they win. And this is really important because they're in ninth place in the standings. So any win, whether it's in the regular season or in the group stage or in the major, is really important. What do you think of the Hook situation and then this match as well?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm kind of torn on the Hook situation just because there's been so much going on involving Hook this season, from his whole situation with Dallas, and then getting on the Thieves, and then getting benched by the Thieves, and now he gets this another shot. Regardless of everything else that's happened, like his video and all that stuff, putting that behind him, he gets another shot to actually play for the Thieves, and he blows a shot. I don't know how else to put it. I just think it's unacceptable that he was late to his time, or his test, whatever time he had to be there. We don't know all the full details. Obviously, it's a weird situation, but barring some wild emergency that prevented him from being on time to that COVID test, there really isn't an excuse for him to miss it, especially in the position he's in, where he's got to try and I feel like he's almost got to try to prove himself again, just based on stuff that's happened in and out of the game this year for him. So that was unfortunate and weird. But regardless, it's going to be interesting to see what the Thieves do moving forward, whether they stick with this Hook / TJ Kenny lineup, or if they plan to have Draza stick around, if they want to bring Venom back in. They got some options, and they've been making changes recently, so we're gonna have to keep our eyes on that moving into next week. But other than that, this was a surprising win for the Guerrillas. I mean, even with the last minute change there with Jazza replacing Hook, I feel like people still probably thought that these were going to take it just because the Guerrillas went winless in stage 4, right? I'm pretty sure they went winless.
Yeah, they did.
In group play, so they weren't and Thieves only went 1-4, but they weren't, they had the swap and whatever, so it's not like they were looking the best, but still, it was probably leaning towards the Thieves slightly, regardless of the change. And the Guerrillas come in, they win both searches, which is something we've talked about with them in the past. These win both hard points, but it doesn't matter. Guerrillas go 2-3-5 and get the job done.
Yeah, the Guerrillas hadn't won a match since the Stage 3 Major. So they beat the Surge in losers round 1 of the Stage 3 Major. So they went over a month without winning, and before that they won the first match of Stage 3. So, I mean, I put it in the article I did for the recap of, I don't even know, it would have been Cheen getting benched, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but they had won 3 of their last 15 matches or something like that.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up too, before we get into that change, that looking at the stats, courtesy of Breaking Point, the only player on the Guerrillas who went positive in this win was Cheen. He dropped a 1.16. Next highest was Assault with a 0.91. So I feel like that's just worth noting for our later conversation.
Yep. And then in a big rivalry matchup, or a matchup that a lot of fans would be interested in, we had the Dallas Empire versus OpTic Chicago in the winners bracket. Dallas ends up sweeping OpTic, which, I mean, it wasn't that close in any stretch of the imagination. And this is kind of surprising. I think that we both picked OpTic to win this, correct? Um, and I think that at least my thinking was that Dallas hadn't looked great, that they had looked much improved in the last week or two, but I just kind of expected OpTic to show up a little bit more, and they certainly didn't. Formal and Envoy especially had, at least statistically, really poor matches. Dashy was the only player on OpTic that ended up finishing with above a 1.0 KD. What do you think of OpTic's loss here to Dallas?
Yeah, I mean, hindsight's 2020, right? Obviously, Dallas makes it to the
Yeah,
finals, but heading into this match, like you said, I had picked OpTic, and guys like especially Scump, but the OpTic guys were like hyping up the fact we're finally back on land. It
yeah,
seemed like they were excited to get back to it. So in my head, I was thinking, all right, OpTic looked decent in this stage. They had that hiccup where they lost to, was it they lost to Seattle in group play, I think.
yeah, they did.
Yeah, so they had that hiccup there, but they've had that hiccup throughout other stages. But this one wasn't as bad as other stages where they had like 2 weeks or whatever. But regardless, coming in, OpTic was in that boat, and then Dallas had still just recently made the change with Vivid prior to the start of this stage, and they didn't look the greatest with him. Like they went 3-2 and they beat Florida, to get that third seed in their group, but it seemed like they were still working through the kinks of adding another new player, and when they had Fellow was on that second AR and Illy was on the sub, so with Vivid on the sub, now Illy was going back to the AR, so it was really like a kind of like a 1.5 2-person change bringing Vivid in, just from a role standpoint as well as the new player. So they were working through that, and I didn't I certainly didn't expect them to make it all the way to the grand finals, but this was an interesting win. Not only were they able to take down OpTic, but it was convincing, like you said. And one thing that I had at least noticed, and I brought up on a couple podcasts or a couple episodes, is that even when Dallas was winning some matches, like it felt like, looking at the numbers from a statistical standpoint, they didn't have like a ton of guys just popping off in series. Even when they were winning, they had guys around that 1.0 KD area, so that might indicate they're playing better as a team or as a unit and not having pop off performances or whatever. But in this series against OpTic, they had Vivid, Illy, and Shotzi all over 1.25 KDs. So that jumped out to me when I was looking at this. And yeah, obviously we're going to talk about Dallas plenty in this
Yeah.
episode, but I was certainly surprised from this performance right off the bat, and it was obviously a sign of good things to come.
In the other winners round one matchup, we had the New York Subliners and the Minnesota Rocker. We both, despite having a roster change thrown in here, Decimate replaced Asim, who could not attend the major due to visa issues. We still thought that the Subliners would come out and win, maybe closer than if they had Asim, but we were still confident that the Subliners would be able to pull this one out. Boy, were we wrong. 3-0 Minnesota. Yeah, just a really surprising performance. And it's not just surprising that they lost, but it was, pretty one-sided, especially the Search and Destroy. 6-0 on Raid for Minnesota. Yeah, and obviously losing in Hardpoint is not something that we're used to from New York. So what do you think of New York's loss here to Minnesota?
I personally like you said, I picked New York, as did you, I'm pretty sure.
Hmm.
So I felt like this was going to be closer, obviously, since New York didn't have ASIM here, but I certainly wasn't expecting Minnesota to just 3-0 stomp them like this. But I think the biggest takeaway for me, I can't really, I feel like I can't take anything away from New York. Like the last time we saw their full strength lineup, they came in second at the last major. So um, I still expect them to be a good team. And now it seems like Asim, is going to be in Texas, and he should be able to compete the next event. So we'll see them at full strength uh, next time, most likely. But I don't really, I feel like I can't really judge anything from New York based on this. It was an unfortunate circumstance, and it's kind of just like a throwaway tournament for them because they weren't able to get the job done with a last minute fill in. And if anything, to me, I feel like this just shows how important Asim is to that team, right? Like, he's gone through a hell of a year. We've documented it multiple times now. Um, and he's not necessarily always that guy who's gonna pop off, but he certainly played well this year and exceeded a lot of people's expectations. And uh, I feel like that's the bigger takeaway for me is just, I can't wait to see New York with Asim back in the lineup. And not thinking anything, I mean, Desi played pretty well, all things considered,
Mm-hmm.
too. He had a couple highlight reel moments in New York series at this major, but uh, yeah, I feel like if we saw Asim playing in this match in New York, I feel like New York would have taken it, but Rocker came in. They didn't, necessarily pick their matchup. They played who was put in front of them, and they got the win.
Yeah, we don't mean to like disrespect, and if any Rocker fans are out there and they're like,
Yeah,
give us credit, it's just, it's, I mean, kudos. Same thing with the Guerrillas. Like the Guerrillas beat a team in front of them. Like there's nothing that they could have done to change their matchup, and just because New York didn't have their lineup, like I mean, a win is a win, and like that's very important for Minnesota because that's extra points for CDL. Maybe help you in standings, especially as we get closer to the end of the season. So fair play to Minnesota. There's nothing wrong with beating a team that is coming off of a like a roster change or kind of a last minute change. That's just our opinion on it. That New York is what we would consider a better team overall, and if they're at full strength, it's a much different dynamic with Asim instead of Decimate. But still, a good result for Minnesota. They move on to winners bracket round two. Let's drop back down to the losers bracket. We had some pretty interesting 3-0s on Friday. We had 3 of the 4 matches were actually 3-0s. Both of the losers bracket matches, Paris versus Seattle and Florida versus LAG, were both sweeps. Seattle, this is a team that we did not expect to beat Paris. We actually both said that Paris would win this matchup. Seattle wins 3-0, and a result that we both agreed on, Florida winning in round two. They beat LAG 3-0 as well. What do you think of these two matchups?
yeah. I don't think there's much we really have to talk about from either of them.
Yeah.
Heading into the tournament, I wasn't expecting much from either London or Seattle, so I just assumed, or I was predicting that Paris would win regardless of who they played, just because, they had looked slightly better in group play. But it actually didn't end up mattering because apparently, people needed to be reminded just how good Octane is on land. And he came out and absolutely fried again. I believe, let me look real quick at the first series. I think the first series he had a 1.71 KD. Yeah, 1.71 KD against London, and in this series against Paris, he has a 1.51, or sorry, 1.59. So he played well both series, helped Seattle get a sweep there, and yeah, I don't really have much to say about that match other than that. I guess we can just say real quick the hard point was close. It was 250, 241 on checkmate. And Express Search and Destroy was 6-2, and Seattle wins another control, Garrison control 3-1. So I believe that put them. Did they end up? I'm gonna scroll up and just look. They did win the control against against OpTic. So I think they are on a 5-game control winning streak now. Very possibly after going on that 10, what was it, 10 control losing streak with the 10 match losing streak.
Yeah,
Or
10.
was it longer?
No, it was 10.
Yeah. So Definitely interesting turnaround from them. We can, talk about them a little bit more, but uh, for me, it just makes me think, what could have been if Seattle had a chance to play on land more often earlier this year. Maybe things would have been a little different. But we'll never know. And in that Florida match, I think again, not much we really have to say. They just, came out. We expected Florida to beat either LA team they played in this one, and that's exactly what they did. Um, Neptune most notably drops a 1.61 in the series skies, behind him with a 1.32, and Awakening had a 1.03 or 1.03, yeah. And then for the Guerrillas, Apathy went 41 and 41, had a 1 KD, and nobody else was positive on the team. So, uh, tough series. The Guerrillas bow out there. Your boys not able to pull off the miracle run even when you doubt them. And Florida moves on.
So let's before we move on into the tournament, let's stop real quick and talk about Octane and Seattle as a whole, and all these other teams that benefited from possibly playing on land for the first time and not online, because Octane has been really outspoken after Seattle had a pretty good performance and a really good performance relative to what they have been used to online this season. So he tweeted. So this is after they were knocked out of the major. He said, "Man, this weekend just makes me think. What if we played on land even more? Can't wait to watch champs after getting pissed on online all year." And then I think his next tweet was literally go from dead last, no hope every series to frying because we're not online anymore. It's just a tease. I gotta watch champs this year. This shit's too funny. So it's an interesting perspective, and a lot of I wouldn't say a lot. A few of the other CDL players, including Crimsix, Temp, who is in the same boat as Octane, as Paris. Unless there's a miracle in Stage 5 group play and Stage 5 major, they would not. Paris would not be included in the top 8 in the CDL championship. I guess just what are your thoughts on the the idea that all 12 teams should be playing at this year's champs, because they did that last year when formats were changed. So formats are flipped. They went from online to offline for at least for this event. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think that was one of the things I was going to bring up was that they did make the change last year, but it was in reverse situations where um originally the season was on land, we had the home series, whatever, and I believe it was only going to be the top 8 teams
Yeah.
making champs last year, and then they decided to let all the teams in because we switched to online with the COVID pandemic and everything. But now it's kind of like the reverse situation where we're going back to LAN and they want to let all the teams in. I don't know if I see it happening. I feel like that change. Obviously, I didn't look up when they announced that exactly last year, but I feel like it's a little late in the season now to say that they're going to let all the teams in. I don't know. Obviously, if there's enough backlash or the players have a voice in the league or whatever, we could see a change happen.
Hmm.
I'm just not going to hold my breath. I feel like it's just a little too late at this point, but who knows?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that unless it's announced within the next week or something, where like I think if you get into Stage 5 group play and there's radio silence from the CDL, then there's almost no shot that it would happen, because then you're really pushing it. You're a month or a month and a half away from the CDL championship, which we haven't even gotten dates for. So I guess it could be longer. I guess, but I just don't see it happening where, like I think that these players have good arguments, because I mean, some teams could be much better offline than they are online, and it's difficult to if I don't know if the CDL had hopes or had plans already when they announced this all online format for the season, if they thought, okay, we'll be on land like for sure by the end of the year. Because if so, then you think they would have thought of this already and planned for this sort of thing. So I don't see it happening personally. It was just an interesting thing that a few of the like big well-known players have been talking about.
I also feel like it doesn't really change too much, even if they allowed all 12 teams in. Like, even with Seattle winning these two, lower bracket matchups at this major, they still finished top 8, right? So it's not like a huge difference. Like, yeah, that would get them some prize money or whatever, but I feel like the cutoff teams, those bottom 4 teams, just they've struggled this year, and I don't know if I would see them necessarily, depending on what the bracket would look like or anything like that. I'm not exactly sure how much of an impact they would have on champs, even if they actually were able to compete. Aside from, Seattle was able to go on a little bit of a run, and they looked better on land, so who knows? But, yeah, I mean, there's that. The other thing too is like these stage 5 group play matches are kind of gonna be, aside from Clay put out that tweet about the battle for like the 2 seed, that's gonna be must watch. But like a lot of those like top teams, like people are watching them for the most part anyway. Whereas these bottom 4 teams, like they're not really playing for anything right now, even if they were added to uh be allowed to play at champs. Like they're playing for the difference from like the 9 and 10 seed, right? So I just don't know how much of an impact the change would have. It would be good from a storyline standpoint, obviously, if one of those bottom 4 teams, they change the format, one of the bottom 4 teams goes on a run at champs. That obviously would be a cool storyline, but I just don't know how realistic that is at this point.
Yeah, just to put it in perspective, Seattle and London are tied for last place in the league. They each have 80 CDL points. In eighth place, Florida. So Florida would be the final team to qualify for champs. They have 170 points. So there's a 90-point difference between last place and eighth place. If you went 5-0 in group play, that's 50 points. And I don't know what placing you would have to get another, let's say, 45 points to get over 170. So, I mean,
They'd have to get top 3.
Yeah, so you would need to go undefeated in group play and have a very stellar run at the major, or lose 1 or 2 matches and win the major, essentially, to get to the point that Florida is currently. And I mean, it's very unlikely that Florida would go 0-5 in group play and lose their major match. And I mean, there's a better chance for the Guerrillas, who are at 100 points in ninth place, but still that's 70 points. And let's be honest, LAG, Paris, London, and Seattle have all played like dog for most of the season. And despite Seattle having a decent run at the major, LAG won 1 and were done. Paris were 3-0'd in their only series on land. London were 3-1 in 3-1 in their only series on land. So it's I don't know how likely it is that the CDL will listen to their complaints now at this point in the season.
Yep.
So let's move on. We have these upper bracket matches. Winners bracket round 2. We had Toronto versus Dallas and Atlanta versus Minnesota. We both picked Toronto. We had OpTic in this spot originally against Toronto, but we thought that Toronto would beat OpTic. Toronto, they come back. They really cut it close. Dallas, I believe this was a reverse sweep from Toronto. Yeah.
The Toronto won map 1.
Oh, okay. So map 1, Dallas up 246, 159, and Dallas ends up losing that map. And Dallas still bounces back, so there's no momentum that they let it just carry over. But Toronto ends up coming back. They win 3-2, and they advance to the winners finals. What did you think of this series?
Again, the big thing like you said, there was that comeback in map one, so Dallas could have, if they closed that out, they could have won this 3-0,
Hmm.
which is kind of surprising. At that time on Friday for this lane event, I'm still sitting here, even after that Toronto ends up winning, I'm just still somewhat in awe of just how quick the turnaround was for Dallas. Like, I'm pretty sure in group play they got 3-0'd by Toronto with this Vivid roster, and I think it was like their second or third match with Vivid. But that's still just like that they obviously improved very quickly, and are starting to click with this new lineup. And that was the big, even though they lost this match, it was super close. Comes down to Game 5, Round 11, and Toronto just clutches up, and they're a major champion in this game. So not exactly surprised, but I was still impressed by Dallas's play in this series.
And then the other winners bracket match, we have Atlanta sweeping the Minnesota Rocker. Not a big surprise here. The Raid Search and Destroy was a close matchup. It went 6-5. FaZe ended up pulling out round 11. But, a 98-point victory on Hardpoint and a 3-0 Garrison Control win. That's just kind of something you would expect out of FaZe. We didn't really expect Minnesota to even be at this point against them. So, I'm not sure how much you have to say, but do you have any thoughts on FaZe's 3-0 here?
I think this is what you expect, and I think, we were thinking that New York would take down Minnesota, and then it would have been Atlanta versus an asim-less New York. And Atlanta still probably would have taken care of business in that one. But, yeah, at this point, you just kind of expected Atlanta to convincingly take down Minnesota. If we look at the stats for the match, Arcity's had a 1.76, 151 and 29. Everyone was positive. For Atlanta, BZ went neutral, 36 and 36. Everyone else was positive. And then for Minnesota, Major Maniac goes 37 and 35 for a 1.06, and then everyone else on Minnesota was in the .7. So, tough series, obviously, but that's just what you expect from Atlanta at this point.
Moving into Saturday, we had an interesting losers bracket round 3 matchup between the Subliners and Mutineers. We've seen these two teams match up against each other in the past. I remember the one that went down to Miami Search Game 5, and the Subliners ended up winning that series. That was probably a month and a half ago. So it's very weird what series end up sticking with me. But the Subliners ended up winning this series 3-2, and this included hopefully a soon-to-be legendary taunt by Clayster, screaming across the stage, "This is a pickup team." Kind of true, and Clay, this is what you really miss when you're online. You don't get Clayster's reaction, yelling across the stage at his opponents. So glad that's back. What do you think of Subliner's win here?
Yeah, that was obviously my favorite moment there. You said, you're losing to a pickup team, or this is a pickup team, whatever. This was closer than I expected at the, uh, at our brackets would have been a little different in the prediction shows. But for our pick 'em that we do with Mike, I thought Florida was going to win this just based off, the fact of how New York looked with Bessie against Minnesota. So I was kind of surprised New York ended up taking it. Obviously, it was a close one. And New York wins both searches, which is, one of Decimate's strong suits in his past before his pro days. So it was an interesting series. I'm kind of surprised it went down to the wire like this, but I guess for me, the bigger thing is, what does it say about Florida, right? Like, where would you rank Florida? Like, obviously they're the 8th spot in the standings, but like Minnesota was able to beat this Subliners team that has a pickup player, but Florida's not. So I guess that means you have to say Minnesota's a better team than Florida at this point. Like, it just brings up some interesting thoughts that we're gonna have to have, or some questions we're gonna have to have answered heading into stage 5.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit in the past about just what ceiling there is for Florida because they've been very up and down. They had that one stage, it was probably stage 3 group play, where they had a very real shot at being the number 1 seed. Um, I just I'm I am not convinced by Florida as like and as a true contender. Even and obviously when you're the 8th place team in the league, you would expect that you're not an actual contender, but in the past, let's say 2 stages, maybe 3 stages, they've shown that there's glimpses of a championship team in there, but they never seem to consistently put it together. And losing to the subliners when they're not at full strength, it just a missed opportunity to, you know, at least cushion, like spread the margin between you and the Guerrillas and try to improve your seeding for champs. So it was very odd that they weren't able to win this series, and especially when you're beating subliners in hardpoint and like so subliners have to go 2-3-5. It's very shocking to lose that kind of series. So and then we had a pretty interesting losers round 3 matchup between OpTic and Seattle. Obviously a rematch of a really maybe probably the biggest upset in this season of the Call of Duty League when Seattle ended their losing streak, their 2-month, 10-match losing streak, and they defeated OpTic in Stage 4 group play. They were unable to do the same thing here. They lose 3-2, nearly reverse sweep OpTic, which would have been the craziest timeline ever. What do you think of OpTic's win?
I mean, you kind of said it there. They look strong to start. Seattle wins another control, which, with OpTic being up 2-0, I don't remember exactly how that control went down. I can't even remember it in my head, but with OpTic being up 2-0 after taking the first 2 maps and Seattle's well-documented past struggles and control, a lot of people probably expected OpTic to just take this 3-0, but Seattle makes them work for it a little bit, and they forced that game 5. Put some fear into the Greenwall's hearts of a potential reverse sweep. But OpTic was able to clutch up. They had, this wasn't their only match of the day, which we'll talk about later, but they had a good day on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a good bounce back match, especially after really not being competitive against Dallas, even if it is Seattle. And I have not been very high on Seattle, and I likely would not continue to be high on Seattle until the end of the year. But still, Seattle came in off of 2 pretty resounding victories and probably a lot of confidence at that point, considering before this major they had won like maybe 5 matches the entire season, and they've already won 2 this event. So a good win for OpTic to just kind of get back and make sure that things didn't just completely go off the rails for this event. And let's move on to round 4. OpTic has their next match against Minnesota. They win 3-1. And Empire in the same loser bracket round 4, they beat the New York Subliners. So New York and Minnesota are out at top 6, which is, not that surprising, I guess, considering New York making a roster change and Minnesota not being a true contender in my eyes, at least. What do you think of these 2 matches and New York and Minnesota going out here?
I think it's just a case where we see again Dallas shows what we probably expected Florida to do against New York in the predicament they were in. Definitely would have been an interesting match to see if it came down to this with New York at full strength, but obviously we'll never know. We'll have to wait to see that play out later on. But yeah, we got Dallas. New York wins the search, which they won both searches against Florida. And they win the search against Dallas, but Dallas wins the three, respawns, and takes care of business. So, um, I don't really have much to say about this one. I think from what we had seen from Dallas prior to the series, I certainly at this time was expecting Dallas to take down uh, New York without ASIM, but it will be interesting to see in my eyes that if in Stage 5 or at the Stage 5 major we see full strength New York against this Dallas team that just came in second, right? That should be a good matchup because last time, we saw New York at full strength, they got second. Dallas is coming off a second place finish, so should be interesting. Hopefully we get to see it.
In this OpTic matchup, um, I I think with Minnesota, like, what is the ceiling for Minnesota here? Because this is one of the better performances that we've seen with them with this lineup. Obviously they beat New York, and it's not very close for FaZe, but a lot of teams haven't been very close with FaZe at this point in the season. So what do you think that now that we've been able to see, like, say, half a dozen matches with this particular rocker lineup, what do you think their ceiling is heading into Stage 5?
I think they're a middle of the pack team. I think obviously FaZe is just in a tier of their own.
Mm-hmm.
Now with Dallas, looking better with Vivid, and I would put, Dallas, Toronto, New York probably in a group. New York with ASIM, obviously, in like an A tier or something like that. Then probably like OpTic in its own tier, just because I feel like they're a very like hot and cold team. Like depends on who shows up on what day, all that. And then after that, the middle of the pack is like Minnesota and Florida for me. I guess you can put the Thieves in there. Not sure if I did, I would have the Thieves below Florida and Rocker just because of all the changes we've been seeing from them recently. Not sure what we're gonna get out of them. So yeah, I think Minnesota, they like you said, they went 1-2 at this major and they get top six. They beat New York, lose to FaZe, lose to OpTic. So I feel like they're just the middle of the pack team. Obviously, it's recent times for them too with this most recent iteration because they uh, brought in Major Media for accuracy at the start of Stage 4, I believe. So still they have Stage 5 now to kind of prepare for champs. They're in that sixth spot in the standings. And it seems like barring something wild happening, that we should see Minnesota champs. But this is probably top six, middle of the pack, where I expect Minnesota to round out the year unless they're able to work something out or do something similar to what we see Dallas, where they just like click at the right time and go on a run.
To finish out Saturday, we have the winners bracket finals, a rematch between FaZe and the Toronto Ultra. So this was the last majors, or not the last majors, the Stage 2 major grand finals, which ended up being, which going in favor of Toronto, but they had a rematch, I believe, in Stage 3 major as well, and FaZe won that. FaZe ends up winning this one 3-1. They qualify for their fourth straight major grand finals this year. They haven't missed one yet, which is just incredibly impressive, and it speaks to why they're so far ahead in the standings, even compared to second place. So FaZe wins this. What do you think of this series?
I mean, at this point, we just see another FaZe, somewhat dominant performance. Toronto does win the search. They took standoff pretty convincingly 6-1, but Atlanta wins the respawns. Raid control was close, 3-2 for Atlanta. Moscow hardpoint was close to 250 to 220. Map 1 raid was a 100-point club for Atlanta. But yeah, at this point in the major, we see Atlanta win 2 series, and they have a 6-1 map count. So I think coming in, we both kind of were on that train of thought of just FaZe looks really good right now. Gonna ride the hot hand, pick them till they give us a reason not to. And in this series, they just showed once again that they're the best team right now.
Mm-hmm. And we move into Championship Sunday, although I don't know if the CDO actually calls it that. Dallas Empire versus OpTic Chicago, a rematch from their winners bracket round 1 matchup. They meet here in the losers semifinals. Dallas again comes out on top. They win 3-1, make it 6-1 map count for the entire tournament against OpTic. What do you think of Dallas's win here and OpTic's losers bracket run as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I think when we did our prediction, we both picked OpTic to beat Dallas in the winners bracket, and then in some form or another, they were rematching again in the lower bracket, and we picked OpTic again because we were saying, like, if OpTic beats them earlier in the tournament, we're going to pick them again to beat them here. And the exact opposite happens where Dallas beats them earlier in the tournament, and then Dallas takes care of business again later. There was some funny banter with Krim and Formal after the match, and that's where we brought up the point where Formal was kind of like, Krim can say whatever you want when you get bodied, the 6-1 map count or whatever the exact wording was. But yeah, I guess this is just from like, looking at the tournament as a whole for OpTic, like they come in 4th place, and it's the 3rd time they've come in 4th place this season. So it seems like that they're kind of, like situating themselves in that spot right now. But the bigger takeaway is just we don't even really get to see OpTic play like some of those other teams because their 2 losses in this tournament come to Dallas. So they lose to Dallas, then they beat Seattle and Minnesota and lose to Dallas again. So it's not like we got to see them play New York. They didn't play Toronto or a full strength. Or I said New York, I think. We didn't get to see them play Atlanta, Toronto, or full strength New York. They lost twice to Dallas, and that's who kicked them out. So, moving forward, both of these teams should be at champs. I'm pretty sure they actually both might be locked in already. Not 100% sure on that. I know there were some announcements and stuff just throughout the tournament with points or whatever. But that's what OpTic's got to be working towards. Just like how can they improve to try and break that 4th place barrier that they've kind of set for themselves this year, because that's just where they're at. If you look at it, they had the stage 2 major where I believe that's where Accuracy had the 1v3 ace clutch or whatever on Moscow, but and aside from that, they've come in 4th at all the other majors. So, gonna be interesting to see if they're able to figure something out for stage 5 at champs.
I started in watching COD when OpTic was like, basically the bronze surfers. They were always like a 3rd place team. So like when for the first year and a half, I was not very accustomed to OpTic winning. Obviously, some of my younger comrades, the people that came into esports or COD esports after me, they're used to the OpTic dynasty where OpTic would, if they didn't win, they were probably in the winners or in the grand finals or like the losers finals or something like that. But this is old OpTic. This is the OpTic that I remember. And I want to bring up this tweet that Brycey put out because I just thought it was interesting. It got some interesting responses as well. He said, in regards to my tweet about OpTic, I suppose it's simplified to say it's about OpTic's skill ceiling, what we have seen of it, and their ability to reach it consistently in regards to the competition they have to beat going forward. The question is, do they beat everyone in 2 months? And I thought that Merck's tweet, because obviously I think he is the best color commentator analyst in the CDL. He said, well, until we see it, it's always they could, but I don't think we've seen it one time this year, maybe early stage 1. Outside of that, they've really struggled against top teams. I don't know if we talked about it much recently because OpTic has been alright, but I think that when they were in their funk and they were not able to get out of, I think it was when they lost to Minnesota and they had that really poor group play where they lost 6 straight or 8 straight maps or whatever. We talked about it then, but essentially, is OpTic even a contender? Because until this event, I wouldn't have said that Dallas was a contender anymore, but obviously they proved it that they can go toe-to-toe with someone like FaZe. But now that we've seen 4 majors from OpTic, and like you said, 3 of those 4 ended with a top 4 finish, and then they had the top 6 finish where they, arguably should have won that match, because, how many times are you going to get 1v3'd in around 11? But what do you think OpTic's ceiling is, or where do you see OpTic, finishing out the season?
I mean, based on everything we've seen so far, like you have to think that 4th place or top 6 range is what they most likely are looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Barring them figuring something out in stage 5. But obviously they have an immensely talented team, tons of potential. It's just going to come down to, can they figure it out and find something that clicks, kind of like we saw Dallas do in this tournament. They didn't have the best performance with visiting group play, but they figured something out, and it clicked at the right time, and they end up making it all the way to the grand finals and pushing FaZe to a map 9. So that's something that OpTic is certainly capable of, in my opinion, if they're able to figure stuff out and get it working. But based on what we've seen right now, if I had to say something right now, I think top 4 is what we're looking at, because I don't know if they can. I don't think they can beat FaZe. I don't know if they can beat. They obviously they lost to Dallas twice. I'm not sure if they can beat Toronto or Full Strength New York. So, they got stage 5, and they got some time to try and prove any doubters wrong and make a change, go on a run for the biggest tournaments of the year. So that's what obviously the Green Wall and the supporters are going to be looking for. But it's going to be interesting to see if they're able to pull it off.
And as long as Champ stays with a top 8 format, we haven't seen, as far as I can remember, an 8-team format or like a tournament format in the CDL yet. So, how does that work? Is it just a straight double elimination where 1 plays 8, 2 plays 7, etc.? Or do you...
It was...
What were you saying?
It was 8 teams for home series last year, wasn't it?
I thought it was 10, right?
Or was it? Oh, it was 10, yeah, and 2 teams missed. Yes, yeah. You're right.
And, even in those situations, they were just kind of like, I don't know. I don't know how they would end up doing this, because, but the reason I bring this up regardless is OpTic is in 5th place right now on the CDO, and I mean, there's a pretty good chance that they won't fall below 5th, because Minnesota is 70 points back, LA Thieves 90, yep, and Florida 100. They have a very good opportunity to improve their standing because they're only 40 points behind New York, and there's a total of 50 points separating them and Dallas, who's in 2nd place. So there's a big chance that they could actually improve their seeding. But if they get into 5th, I mean, you would, if it's like a straight 4 versus 5, at this point they'd be playing New York, which is not a very favorable first round matchup, or Dallas or Toronto. So I think it's just interesting that, I mean, these 4th place or top 6 performances are really hurting them when it comes down to it, because they're going to have a really tough winners bracket round 1 opponent, presumably, if that format is the way that I think it will be. So it's interesting that...
I don't know.
What do you think?
I think they're gonna try to... I don't know how it would work, but I feel like they're gonna try to... Just based off of Clay talking about the 2nd seed, I feel like there's gonna be at least 1 bye for the 1st and 2nd seeds again. I don't know how it would work, but I feel like obviously there's got to be some incentive there, or some reason why he in particular was looking at that number 2 seed. Maybe it could just be because he wants the best seed possible. I don't know, but
maybe it's 1 and 2 get a first round bye, and then 3 plays 8, 4 plays 7, 5 plays 6, something like that, and
maybe, but then you have 3 matchups there into leading. I don't know. It would look weird.
Yeah. Maybe 1 would get an additional round bye. I don't know. There's just, I mean,
maybe
I don't think there. I mean, other than I don't even know how many teams are at the Full Sail Invitational. Like how many tournaments in like major Call of Duty history has gotten to the point where there's only 8 teams, and I mean I would presume that there's going to be double elimination, but there's just so much information that we don't know about champs that it's made it really interesting. But I don't want to go off on a tangent here. Like let's finish out the major. We have one more match, or excuse me, 2 more matches, because we still need to talk about Toronto versus Dallas. And we saw earlier in the tournament, Toronto beat Dallas. We obviously Dallas had their opportunities to finish out that series in 3 maps. They obviously blew that first map and ended up losing 3-2. They get their revenge here. They win 3-2. What do you think of Dallas being able to, come back and beat Toronto and advance to their first major grand final since stage 1?
I might sound like a broken record at this point, but I really just didn't expect it. Dallas just, I'm not going to say it again because I don't want to repeat myself. But yeah, they showed composure here, picking up that reverse sweep. And one thing I want to point out, which before we get into the grand finals, is the last 2 maps of this Dallas-Toronto series were Moscow, and Dallas won Moscow Hardpoint 250-229, and Moscow Search 6-4. That'll be a point worth mentioning when we get to the Atlanta series. But yeah, I'm gonna keep saying it. I was impressed by Dallas's performance throughout this entire tournament. They showed a lot of resilience, being able to pull off this win over Toronto, which most people probably, especially because Ultra had beaten Dallas, even though it was close, and Dallas could have 3-0'd them earlier in that first round, winner bracket round matchup. It was another close showdown. Just Dallas came out on top of this one.
And in the grand finals, a rematch of stage 1, Atlanta played the Dallas Empire, and this has been a point of contention among some players for the entire season. But the fact that Atlanta doesn't have any advantage other than the map veto seemed to be a big sticking point. And coming in, Dallas, they open up the series with a 250-202 win on Garrison Hardpoint. Atlanta does rebound and wins 6-4 on standoff search, and then 3-0 on Garrison Control. And then Dallas takes 2 more maps, and then FaZe takes a map, Dallas takes a map, FaZe takes a map. And then it comes down to the first map 9 of CDL history. Raid, Search, and Destroy. Atlanta takes it 6-4. Abizi, fortunately for your fantasy team, goes 11-5 and leads FaZe to the 3rd major win of the season. What do you think of this grand final series?
Yeah, I mean, you want to bring up fantasy real quick? Just a quick shout out to the Youngstown Fighting Peacogs for starting Asen this week, even though he wasn't playing at the major.
I didn't bring it up because I knew I looked on it and I couldn't have won even if I put Aqua in my starting lineup.
Yeah.
So pretty sad.
Yeah. Regardless, this was an incredible series. You kind of, briefly touched on it there, but Dallas winning map 1. We saw, obviously, with Toronto, most notably at the Stage 2 major, they went on that wild run where they had a lot of momentum in the lower bracket, playing multiple series back to back to back. And, Dallas comes out there on fire after taking down both OpTic and Toronto, and they win the first map. And Atlanta responds by taking the search and the control. But then again, like I just mentioned, we get a double Moscow here with Moscow Hardpoint and Moscow Search for maps 4 and 5. And I don't remember the exact stats on it, but I'm pretty sure Atlanta had like the best record on Moscow Hardpoint. I don't think they were undefeated on Hardpoint. I think they might have had 1 or 2 losses on it. But then I'm pretty sure they said they were undefeated on Moscow Search before this, and this was their first loss on Moscow Search of the season. So that was a big turning point in the series, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, just based off that previous series between Dallas and Toronto is that they had just come off playing Moscow against another really good team. Maybe that was the advantage that they needed to, overcome Atlanta on strong maps because if you look at it, the series breakdown there, if Atlanta wins those two maps on Moscow Hardpoint and Search, which, based off their record, whatever the exact record is, many people probably would have expected them to be favored for that. They have a 4-1 edge, and then the grand final is basically almost over because Dallas has to win 4 straight maps. So those are 2 really big wins by Dallas on Moscow to push it 3-2 in their favor. Atlanta ties it up by winning another control. It was ridiculous. I don't know if you saw it exactly when, but they brought it up a couple times on the broadcast. It was just like the control stats for Atlanta compared to the rest of the league, and they were literally number 1 in every category. It was great. So they just continued to play good. Control, which in this best of 9 we only see 2 control maps, but obviously if you're able to solidify those 2, then you just have to win 3 of the other 6, right? So good spot for them to be in. Then Dallas comes out and takes Express to go to championship point. They took Express Search 6-1. And Atlanta responds by winning Apocalypse Hardpoint 250-98. So it's just going back and forth at that point. And then we get to Raid Search, first best map 9, like you said. And now that I'm thinking about it, I would have to check, but I'm pretty sure all 3 of Atlanta's championships this year came on Raid Search. I know for a fact the first one against Dallas was on Raid Search because they were talking about doing the finishing move on Crim. It was a 4v1.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure they were talking about doing a finishing move on Clay on Raid Search 2 in the Stage 3 Major, but they ended up RC's like, no, and they ended up shooting him. I could be wrong, but that would be interesting if all 3 were won on Raid Search. I know obviously it wasn't a search for all of them because I think Toronto won on Checkmate Hardpoint when they beat Atlanta, but regardless, just an interesting point. Atlanta was in control of this Raid Search. I think they went up 5-2. It might have been 5-1, not 100% sure. And then Dallas showed signs of life. They fought back, but Atlanta ends up closing it out. It was a questionable. I know we got Trim in the chat here, who's a Dallas fan, and, our head correspondent for the Ego Chall Podcast. He was a little flabbergasted by Dallas's setup there in round 10 where they lost, where Atlanta ended up getting a plan off on I'm gonna mess up the bomb name because they changed the bomb names for Raid. It's now a bomb at the I don't know, the water by Tiki, or the bomb by Tiki, sorry. Atlanta gets the bomb down there, and Dallas was planning for or they were set up for ringside playing back in their spawn. And Vivid was on the flank after the tournament, and I sent the clip to Trem where Vivid said that Simp threw a fake trophy towards Art ringside, the white van there, and because Dallas had Engineer on, they saw the trophy was there and thought Atlanta was gonna make a push there, which kind of explains their setup. But then Atlanta just goes to the other bomb site, gets the bomb down, 4v4 retake is kind of hard on that site, and they end up winning the championship. So that was a really interesting last round. If the fake trophy play or whatever is a strat from Tupac, that's super interesting. And obviously pays off. If it is, we don't know for sure. But that was some cool insight, and it was a really, regardless of the end result, it was a very intense and just a great 9-map series of Call of Duty.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway is that Dallas looked competent in every map or every game mode against FaZe, because they win 2 hard points. They win Garrison and Moscow, and then they also win 2 searches. They win Moscow and Express. Obviously, Control's a little bit different. They had their opportunity to win Raid Control, which would have, had they won Express right after that, they would have won the match. But, it's been very rare this season that we've seen any team be able to even best FaZe in any single game mode. So to do it in, arguably the two most important modes and still lose a series, it's got to be, pretty disappointing for the Empire, because they have their opportunities to put away this series and to win their first major of the season and really prove like a ton of people wrong, considering how much everybody has been disapproving of the Hook change, and then even with the Vivid change, not having the faith that they would be able to pull something out like this. So they were really close, but obviously I'm sure they're all really disappointed that they weren't able to pull it off. But I just found that interesting that they were able to take 2 hard points and 2 searches, and just control ended up being the only thing that they could have put over the top if they had won.
Yeah, so I think, the storyline here obviously is FaZe clutches up, wins their 3rd major, right? They guarantee number 1 seeded champs. They're just, they're the best team in the league right now. But I think, especially with what Clay was tweeting out and, looking at the standings, for CDL points, it's just the rest of the pack there at the top of the standings. It's really close, and Stage 5 is going to be interesting, especially for those teams to see how things shake out. I'm laughing at Trev and chat. But yeah, so like we might see, we've seen Atlanta experiment with their map pool a little bit in these group play matches. I think we're going to continue to see that in Stage 5. They're going to try to, solidify that for the major and champs moving forward. But those other teams like, Dallas, Toronto, New York, and OpTic, I feel like they all should be going really hard for these group play matches heading into Stage 5, trying to get the best seed possible for champs and going forward. But yeah, I think, Dallas, it was a great run for them. Wasn't expected on my part. And obviously guys like Trem, Dallas fans, happy to see it, but it's just going to be interesting moving forward now to see where Dallas, if Dallas is able to remain in this conversation, as like in that next tier below FaZe.
Yeah, I'm gonna pull up the standings real quick so we can get an idea of
I was gonna ask
where all these teams are. So the top, so what is it? The top 5 have clinched a spot in champs, but obviously the seeds are not locked in other than FaZe. FaZe is guaranteed to be the number 1 seed at champs this season because they are 145 points ahead of second place, which would it's not possible. The most you can get is 125 in a stage. What do you want?
And just real quick, I was going to say, just pointing out, because I put the clip in the Twitter chat too of the flank. When Methods found out, he was like, holy shit, are Atlanta actually 30-4 this year? I thought that was so funny. Like, it just goes to show exactly how strong FaZe have been. We're literally in the end of June, and they've lost 4 series this year. It's kind of nutty.
And I mean, one of those is a grand finals to Toronto. I believe they lost to, was it LAG that they lost to? They
lost to LAG. They lost to New York in Hydra's debut, right?
Yeah.
In that Stage 3 group play. So that's 3.
They would have lost to New York in the winners finals, right? Because that was Hydra's clutch. So yeah. So New York has been 2. LAG, the best team in the league. They pulled off the first one. And then obviously Toronto in the grand finals. So, I mean, that's what they lost 4 series, but you would expect that because they've gone undefeated in most of these stages, and they've gotten to the grand finals in every single stage. So, I mean, where has there been an opportunity to lose, I guess, if you've been following their like results and everything. So, it's just really interesting. They're incredible. I can't believe I doubted them when Toronto was, like the hot team, and they're still like one of the hottest teams, but just, I mean, how can you pick against FaZe at this point? So FaZe is locked in because they're 30-4. They have a 145 point lead, but 2 through 5 is separated by 50 total points, which is 5 wins, and then obviously if you do well at the major, you get extra points and everything. So Dallas currently holds second, Toronto has third, the New York Subliners have fourth, and OpTic is in fifth at 270. And then the final 3 teams, if the season ended today, that would also qualify for champs are the Minnesota Rocker, Los Angeles Thieves, and Florida Mutineers. Florida currently has 170 points, which is a 70-point lead over the 9th place team, the Los Angeles Guerrillas. And then Paris, London, and Seattle round out the bottom 4. Seattle and London are actually tied for last place, but London has 1 fewer loss on the season, which I guess they can hold that over Seattle at the moment. So just a real interesting look at the standings for this season. I mean, really, it's very unlikely, like I said earlier, that the top 8 changes in terms of which teams actually make it, because it would take a very, very impressive effort by any of the bottom 4 teams to get over any, I mean, it would be almost impossible for Minnesota to get knocked out of the top 8, and it would be very, very unlikely that Thieves or Mutineers would be knocked out as well.
Well, if you look at it just real quick, break it down a little further, Atlanta locked in at number 1 there. Then we have 2, 3, 4 is really close, separated literally by 10 points there.
Yeah.
OpTic, between the 40 points between New York and OpTic, it's not obviously like the 70-point gap between Florida and the Guerrillas, right? But it's still like a decent sized gap.
Yeah.
Especially when you look below here, where we have Rocker, LA, and Florida 6 through 8 separated by 30 points. So that 2 to 4 and the 6 to 8 spots are really, in my mind, where we could see some flip flopping depending on how the teams perform in stage 5. And that's where my eyes, or that's what I'm going to be looking forward to moving forward here. And then obviously, if OpTic goes on a good run, they could shake things up too. But it's just a little less likely that they have a major impact on that 2, 3, 4 race comparatively, just because of 40 points being a different 4 times a difference of 10 points.
Yeah, and if we have any new viewers or listeners that haven't been following the CDL season, it's 10 CDL points per win in group stage. So if you say go 5-0 in your round robin group play, that's 50 points. And I think nobody has done it other than Atlanta this season, so it's obviously not a super likely option for most of these teams. But I mean, I guess any team can do it. It's just that it's very unlikely that any of these teams will do it other than FaZe at this point. And it does look increasingly likely that OpTic will end up in 5th, unless, I mean, obviously it would have to be a good performance from them for stage 5 and the stage 5 major, but something would have to go wrong essentially for Dallas, Toronto, or New York to let them pass them by without giving them a big fight. So should be really interesting. Something to look out for in the last 5 matches of group play and then the last major of the season. And let's talk about some roster mania news before we get out of here. We actually had an actual roster change, not a late stage substitution. The Los Angeles Guerrillas announced, this was yesterday, I guess. My days are getting absolutely mixed up here, but yesterday the Guerrillas benched Cheen, Money Cheen, and promoted Mental, who has been on their LAG Academy roster this entire season. Mental was also a really successful Gears of War pro before switching to COD before this season. I just thought it was interesting. I mean, it's obviously interesting when any team makes a roster change, but LAG had been apprehensive to make a roster change for most of this season. They obviously did it when they benched Vivid and brought in Cheen from LAG Academy, and that was reportedly because Vivid wanted to make a roster change, and the rest of the roster did not want to, and it ended up being Vivid getting pushed out and Cheen getting brought up. But Cheen actually tweeted, usually a super positive guy, like never lets things publicly get to him at least. But he tweeted, "Just sucks another year I'm put into fix a broken team, but they refuse to see the real issue." And he's obviously alluding to this year, but also last year when he was a part of the OpTic Gaming Los Angeles roster. He came in to replace Dashy. At that point, OpTic was like really hurting because they had struggled throughout the first few months of the season. He comes in, they kind of stabilize. I think they might have gotten to the grand finals that first home series that he was in, but they did super well immediately after he was put in, and then they kind of fizzled out, and they ended up I think finishing ninth in the regular season, and they replaced him before champs. So kind of a similar situation for him this year. LAG obviously didn't have they haven't been very good recently, but I don't know how much you can really chalk that up to Cheen and what he's brought to the team. What do you think of this change?
I think I think Cheen came in for J Cap last year, and then Dashy and Cheen were both replaced by Draza and Hollow.
Oh, okay.
But regardless,
Yeah.
it's a tough situation for him. Personally, again, like you said, trying to fix a broken team. LIG has struggled all year, aside from you being on the bandwagon.
Yeah.
They had that stage where stage 3, I guess it feels like it was forever ago.
Mm-hmm.
But they had stage 3 where they were going maps 5s and they weren't able to clutch up. But aside from that, they had the upset over Atlanta FaZe. But other than that, just haven't seen much from the squad. Um, for me, I feel like bringing Mental in is the right move. Like, even though they're only 70 points back of potentially making champs, it's kind of chalked at this point. Like, it's gonna take almost a miracle for them to get in.
Mm-hmm.
So the season is basically over, in my opinion. I guess they could prove me wrong. But at this point, that's why I feel like bringing Mental in is a good move, in the sense that he was one of the most talked about players in the preseason, off-season period there before the season started, just because he hadn't played professional Call of Duty before, competed in COD. He was a Gears guy, and he makes the switch over, and the Guerrillas gave him a shot over some of these other veterans or even up-and-coming players who actually were in COD competing. So that was a storyline in that off-season period, and now he's going to get a chance to show what he's capable of. It might be tough. I'm not sure how much we'll be able to take away from it, just based on the circumstances or everything. But I know if I was in his shoes and I'm being brought in for this last stage, and kind of looking like the season is over, I'm going to be playing for stats and just trying to put up the best numbers I can, and prove any doubters wrong. But although I think that bringing in Mental is the right move, I don't agree with benching Cheen. I'm not really. I haven't watched too much of the LAG Academy. I know they've been one of the few teams, them in New York, to have an actual CDL affiliated academy team this year. But I haven't seen much from LAG Academy, so I don't know individually how Mental has been performing. But I just feel like I'm not sure if Cheen was the right person for him to replace. I think if Mental is a sub player, like I believe he is, then it makes sense. Kind of similar to the Vivid situation, he would be coming in to play a sub alongside Apathy, and then that allows Silly to go back to a flex role AR with Assault, and we saw. Especially when the QBZ was briefly a thing, Silly was kind of performing better in that assault rifle flex role compared to the sub role. So I could be wrong. I think Mental's a sub player, but I might be wrong. We'll obviously have to wait to see. But regardless of what happens, I'm excited to see what he's able to do.
Yeah. And, this podcast is 100% a Paris is Winning Champs podcast and a LAG is Winning Champs podcast. But we're also a Money Cheen podcast. So we stand for Money Cheen. And something interesting that Chrome pointed out on Reddit, Silly said, just to clarify, since I thought this was obvious, players don't make roster changes, just FYI. Thought that was common knowledge. And then someone sarcastically says, oh yeah, you definitely have no say in your roster, and that's why your best player was dropped twice. And then Silly said, yes, precisely. So it seems to, I think in like 90% of the teams in the CDL, the players have, the overwhelming responsibility of dropping players or deciding to move on from a certain player, but it doesn't seem to be the case with LAG. I'm not sure if it's an upper management situation where they're like, all right, you guys suck, let's move on from Cheen and see what Mental has, or if this is Bevels, who, I would think would have a pretty good relationship. But I saw that Patty P, Aches, he tweeted about the roster change, and obviously he was benched by LAG last year. And I talked with Bevels after that, and I believe there was some bad blood between Bevels and Aches and how the roster change went down. So I'm not sure if this is just a purely coaching staff decision, which would be interesting. That mirrors how traditional sports are done, but very much not how COD esports is done. And I'm not really sure what to make of that, if that's a positive change or a negative change, to be honest.
I think it's just something that will change as Call of Duty esports or the CDL just grows or progresses, right? Like, we can't come into this franchising era where so many of these players have been competing together or against each other for years, some even a decade.
Yeah.
And they have that history together. But as players get older and retire and the new generations come in, like, we might just see that shift to where the general manager, the organization is making more of these changes with less player input. Obviously, I feel like in a game like Call of Duty, where it's only like a 4-player roster now, even when it was 5v5, but now that it's 4v4 again, the team size is just small to the point where the players should have some say. It's not like, like an NFL roster where there's 50 guys, or, even an MLB roster where there's 25. Like, it's harder for players to have a say in that when there's just so many other, moving pieces involved. But with the smaller roster size of COD, I feel like players will always have some say, and especially like, if you have a captain or a star player, they'll certainly have some input. But just as the CDL continues to evolve and grow, we might get to that more traditional sports era where just, management is making these decisions. Like right now, I'm just thinking, JCap's the coach of LA Thieves, right, and Mud Dog's the GM, but like, let's say CDL's still around in like 10, 15 years, JCap like moves to become the GM, and LA Thieves has like these 3 young 18-year-olds who are literally like 3 right now. If it's 15 years from now, they're not going to have that relationship with JCap that some of these other guys might, like with JCap's history of playing with people. Just obviously an example with JCap, but that's just, what I'm thinking right now.
Yeah.
So as the years progress, we might see less of it.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know if I said this to you or if I don't know, I had a conversation with Nubsy. This was right after all of the drama went down last year with Seattle's lineup, and like people really blaming him for their issues, and like not being decisive about changing up the rosters, which I always think is interesting. But just like, how much credit should we give to coaches for the success of a team, and how much blame should coaches get when a team is not performing up to what people expect of it? Because I think when the first time that I remember a coach actually getting credit for a big win was probably Bevel's getting credit for EG winning champs, because he was supposedly the mastermind behind the search and destroy strategies and kind of the overall strategic movement with that team. But in most other cases, coaches at that point were hype men, like Mr. X. Like, nobody gives Mr. X any damn credit for Complexity being one of the greatest Call of Duty teams of all time. If you want to give Flamesword some credit for his role in the OpTic dynasty, go ahead, but I don't think many people are doing that. But now, like, you have actual, like, coaching staffs for most of these teams. Like, FaZe picked up Tupac in the middle of the season after losing, like, 2 search and destroys in a row, and they're like, oh, we need to fix this crap. And it's just, that's a very different mindset. So I don't really know how much, I've never really heard of a coaching staff making changes without the team's decisions. Maybe that happened in Toronto last season, because I know that Classic got benched for like 2 days, and I think that was mostly a coaching decision. But it's always weird to see how traditional sports and how traditional corporate structure bleeds into COD esports, which has the reputation of being a friendship league, as like people like to point out last year.
Yep, I think that's again something we'll see as the CDL, assuming it continues to grow and develop over the years. I think we'll see bigger coaching staffs that have more of an impact, especially if like some of these players who are playing now move into those coaching roles. I think that's something that we'll see later on. Trim just brought up the point, a question in chat. Do you guys think players should have a say? I kind of touched on it, but I think they should have a say to an extent. But again, it just comes down to like the roster sizes for COD. Like there's only, so if one player is getting a say in a team, like it only affects like 3 spots. So they have like, it's just different. Whereas if George Steinbrenner went to Derek Jeter and was like talking about who they should sign or something like that, like they have more wiggle room because they have more open spots to try and bring people in. Obviously, salary cap, all that. Weird example, but it's just that's the way I think of it. Like the player, if you're going to a player to get his opinion, like there's really only 3 other players that you can make a move for. So I don't know. I think to an extent, like because they're just competing with them, and there's only 4 people, and you're playing with them like alongside them every day. I think the players should have some say. But the question then becomes to what extent, and when do we get to this point where it's more less of a balance between player say and management making the decisions?
I agree with you. I think that in most scenarios, players will, for the foreseeable future, have some part in the decision-making process about who's on a roster, because that's how it is in traditional sports. I mean, we see it with the Lakers and LeBron. LeBron does have significant say in who is on that roster year in and year out. And, I mean, that's where the meme comes that he is the GM and he's the coach and he can decide who plays and who doesn't. But it makes sense. Like with basketball, there are only 15 total players, and you're at one time only 5 players on a court at one time. With Call of Duty, it's even smaller, where you have only 4 players. The substitutes are not really substitutes; they are just like bench warmers essentially until a roster change needs to be made, and then it's more of a permanent roster change. It's not like, oh, you're not feeling well today, all right, we're going to swap you out for player X or something. Like that doesn't happen. So I think that there's always going to be some kind of player control or player say in how rosters are constructed, but I think that's how it should be. I mean, I don't want to, if it's me, Trem, Bink, and Mike, and we're not performing well, and GM Jim, who is bankrolling this team, he comes up to me and says like, all right, like we need to make a roster change, but like who do you want to pick up? Like I would personally want to be asked that, because one, that gives me confidence that I'm not the one getting thrown out of this team. And two, if I have the option of picking a player that I either know is someone really really reliable or as my friend, that's what I would want out of the situation. But maybe I'm different than other people.
That's a tough example, man. I mean, there's no breaking up J squared, right? And then like you can't say you're getting rid of Mike. So like I think in that situation, you either might be the odd man out, or like we might just like have to overthrow GM Jim and be like, yeah, we're not changing, we'll figure it out and
We'll
buy
get
him
GM
out
Nick
the
on the
team.
case.
Well, that'd be a lot.
Yeah, I mean that's just. I mean, I just don't see it happening. I don't see that these teams would. It just makes it really unpopular, because at this point in time, what players, like these top tier players, are going to go into a situation where they have absolutely no control over who's on their roster or not? Like, how are you going to convince Simp, or how are you going to convince Scump or Shotzi, or like whoever that you think is like this very talented player that can help your team? How are the Guerrillas going to convince any of these players, oh, you should definitely come to this roster, where you have absolutely no control over who gets benched or not? Like, how do you even effectively do that?
No, it's a good point, and like I said, I think it's something we're gonna have to keep our eye on and see how it develops as the CDL progresses. But um, I think we don't have to talk on it too much more.
Yeah.
It's not something that's going to change overnight, unfortunately, for the Guerrillas situation.
And the final topic that I just wanted to briefly bring up, because there's really not like that much to say about it, but Asim, who obviously missed the Stage 4 major, he tweeted earlier today that he is getting his visa tomorrow. So when you're, I guess he tweeted that yesterday. Where are my days going? So either way, he's supposed to be moving to Dallas, where all of the other Subliners players are located this week, which is good news for them, because they should have him in time for Stage 5 group play, and then presumably be able to compete in a Stage 5 major, which I don't think it's been announced, but I think we all assume that it will be on LAN again. So that's really good news for the Subliners, who really could have done a lot better probably at the last major if they had him. Do you have any thoughts on that before we get out of here?
No, I think obviously it's a good situation. It's going to be a drastic change in the sense of Eason's been playing these online matches from Toronto, and now he goes from not being able to play in the major to being able to be with his teammates every single day in and out of games. So could be something that makes New York even that much scarier of a team if it helps them develop chemistry in and out of the game. Definitely something interesting. I know I have high hopes for this New York team in Stage 5. I think they're a really strong team. Just had to battle these, obviously, unfortunate circumstances with Asim's visa issues, but I'm excited to see what they're able to do moving forward. The only other thing I wanted to bring up, I know my answer, at least for this question, but do you think we're going to see any other roster changes aside from this mental swap with Chino for LAG?
I mean, you can never be too sure with London, because like they're not obviously doing anything. Like I just don't see it. I mean, I think we probably would have heard something already, and unless they have a lineup that they really want to try out for Stage 5, then that's when they pull the trigger. I don't think Seattle would make that change, because they obviously have some positive momentum, and this is actually a relatively new lineup, and same thing for London. LAG obviously just made a change, so I don't see any more roster changes coming after this Cheen mental situation. And yeah, I mean, I would say the most likely team to make a change is London, but that's just because they made several changes already this season. What do you think?
Yep. I think, aside, we also, I guess I'm going to exempt LA Thieves here because
Yeah,
uh, they're most likely going to do something. Like, we don't know what, but I don't think they're going to necessarily sign a new player. Like, they have Kenny, Draza, TJ, Venom, Slasher, and Hook. So I believe some combination of those six players will be the roster. We just don't know exactly what they'll look like. So aside from both LA franchises, I don't think we're going to see any other major roster changes heading into Stage 5. I think it's going to be a very quiet roster mania period.
yeah. It'll be probably the quietest since like post stage 1 or something like that. So should be really interesting. That's all we have. That was our Stage 4 wrap up show. Make sure to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. We're also on Google Podcasts, Spotify, all those other podcasting platforms, as well as YouTube. So make sure to subscribe and like the videos on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter. Bink is at jbink with 2Ks. I am at Prez Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. Our next show will be on Tuesday, June 29th. In that show, we will preview the Stage 5 group play. We'll give our predictions for the first 10 matches of the group stage. We'll also get to know who exactly is in whose group. I think the group drawing is on Friday or something like that. So we'll figure out where the teams fall and who will be playing in the final group stage, and then we'll preview it on Tuesday. So next Tuesday, June 29th. Yeah, we'll see you then. Take it away, Bink.
Yep, you hit the nail on the head. That's going to be the big thing. We're assuming they haven't officially announced it, but the group selection show should be on Friday. Obviously, it might be a little interesting because Atlanta will be in Group A since they won the major. Dallas will automatically be in Group B, but then Atlanta has that first pick to choose who goes into Dallas's group. So do they pick Toronto? Do they pick New York? Maybe OpTic, I don't really know. I would assume it would either be Toronto or New York, and then Dallas gets to choose who goes into FaZe's group, and then we'll obviously go through that whole process, and it'll be interesting. I'm really excited for Stage 5, even if, we think there's going to be this quiet roster mania period. There are going to be some meaningless matches just because we're hitting that end of the season, but there's also going to be a lot of exciting matches between these, middle of the pack teams and how it shakes up the standings. So I'm excited for it. But yeah, enough about that. Thanks for tuning in, guys. And as always, send the chow.